Alright, so it's February 29th, 1940, Oscars night. Everyone is in attendance to celebrate arguably the greatest year in film history, 1939. The nominees that year were stacked with some career best films and performances, and then one of the most important things in the history of film happens. Hattie McDaniel, a black woman most famous for playing the house slave Mammy in Gone with the Wind, takes home the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress. She would be the first person of color to do so until 1964 with Sidney Poitier, who won his Oscar then. It was a triumphant moment and should be celebrated for how groundbreaking of a decision it was. However, this decision, despite being well-deserved, was for a film that hand-waved the truth of slavery and has been criticized ever since for it, and McDaniel's success sadly only led her to receive similar roles for the rest of her life. Gone with the Wind is a controversial film, to say the least. It's impeccably crafted, sweeping and grand, luxurious and fine, and is no doubt a masterpiece of filmmaking. But it carries with it many issues it's tried to address, but very rarely succeeded in doing so. Gone with the Wind was supposed to, in the eyes of its producer David O. Selznick, right the wrongs of Birth of a Nation. And though Gone with the Wind never reaches the racist intentions of that film, it sadly doesn't do enough to combat it. Gone with the Wind was released in 1939 and was directed by Victor Fleming, who received sole credit for the film and was based on the popular Southern epic novel by Margaret Mitchell. It stars Clark Gable, Vivien Leigh, Hattie McDaniel, and Olivia de Havilland, and follows the story of a sheltered and manipulative Southern belle and a roguish profiteer who face off in a turbulent romance as the society around them crumbles with the end of slavery and is rebuilt during the Civil War and Reconstruction periods. Gone with the Wind is one of those films you hear about all the time. It's a classic, a masterpiece, one of the most important films ever made, based on one of the most popular books ever written. And it has also gone under much scrutiny due to its wishy-washy depiction of slavery and only adding to the lost cause myth. But it needs to also be stated that this was not the intention of the filmmakers when it was being made. Gone with the Wind, from conception, was the brainchild of David O. Selznick, who was very liberal in his time and wanted to make a film that corrected the wrongs of Birth of a Nation, D.W. Griffith's racist epic about the Civil War and Reconstruction period, which was so popular that it resurrected the Ku Klux Klan. Selznick didn't want this despite the fact that Gone with the Wind was written by a Southerner, racist in design, and supported the lost cause myth, and yet he persevered. The film does what it can to mitigate some of the racist overtones of the book, such as removing a KKK meeting and making some characters a bit more nuanced in their feelings on slavery. But the film never brings up the issue of slavery as an evil, with some saying, oh, I would have freed them if they hadn't already been freed after the war, or never showing slaves as suffering in trying to not repeat the sins of Birth of a Nation. Selznick ended up covering it up and took it upon himself to handle these issues rather than speaking to outside groups, and that is the biggest fault of Gone with the Wind. In trying not to be another Birth of a Nation, it ends up being a watered-down version of that film that meant well, but failed in execution. I couldn't possibly go over all the nuances of this situation, and there are many YouTubers that have already addressed the racial issues present in Gone with the Wind. So I will simply recommend Cold Crash Pictures' 2-part video essay on should we still be watching Gone with the Wind. It's an extremely informative video and goes into far more detail about the issues presented in the film than I ever could. But I think he makes some good arguments in favor of the film in that video. As to how I feel about the film, well, it's similar to how I feel about Birth of a Nation, and was the subject of one of my most watched videos on the channel on if we should watch Birth of a Nation. And my answer is the same for this film as it was for that film, which is a resounding yes. We are cheating ourselves if we don't watch or call attention to some very challenging forms of art. Birth of a Nation and Gone with the Wind are celebrated films for their filmmaking, performances, artistry, and their contributions to the film medium that still echo today. To disregard these films is to disregard some of the worst aspects of our past. These films need to be watched with the conscious understanding that these films are flawed on some pretty fundamental levels. Despite all the good intentions, Gone with the Wind has still been defined as racist. But does that mean we can't watch it? No. It simply means we have to watch it and be aware of the problematic moments. Gone with the Wind can still be enjoyed for its storytelling, characters, iconic lines, score, and pure filmmaking. But to ignore the problems is also wrong as well. I've also seen this film 3 times now, and this time around was a really special moment as I got to see the full film in a theater, the way it was meant to be seen, intermission included, and it's an experience I'm never going to forget. I'm also happy that my showing addressed many of the important issues that have plagued the film and tarnished its reputation, because I believe people need to be conscious of what they are getting into when it comes to a film like this. Gone with the Wind is filmmaking at its most grand. It's large, sweeping, and beautiful to watch. It's a classic and follows a protagonist that I feel is misunderstood as just being a whiny and just not very good person. That's pretty spot on. Scarlett O'Hara is our protagonist, but it would be wrong to call her a hero. In fact, it would be better to classify her as an anti-hero. She's flawed, delusional at times, and is absolutely ruthless in ensuring that her father's plantation survives after the fall of the Civil War. Vivien Leigh was the perfect casting for this role. She's young, conniving, and infuriating to watch, and a lot of that is the point. She's unlikable and frustrating to watch, and watching her make some of the worst decisions and constantly trying to get with the man of her dreams, Ashley Wilkes, is exhausting. I think this misunderstanding of Scarlett's character has led people to really despise her, but I think she's great. She acts irrationally. She acts like a child, and children do stupid things, but yet she tries to be independent and save herself from poverty, and that is really compelling. Gone with the Wind is promoted as a romance film between Scarlett O'Hara and Rhett Butler, but that would be completely false. The romance doesn't come from the sweeping love between two individuals, but the romance of one's home. Scarlett loves Tara, her plantation home, and the film explores how Scarlett will do everything she can to protect it. It's ultimately a tale about land and a person's entitlement to it. The romance is the period the film is set in. The film opens up with flowery writing about the death of the Old South, and the film romanticizes that in glorious ways. Not all of them positive, but it's meant to show the fall of the South, and I think Gone with the Wind ultimately accomplishes this very well in a way that a similar film like Birth of a Nation never could. Gone with the Wind should not be a film you go to get an accurate history lesson, and should instead be one to go to get an understanding of Southern ideals. Obviously, some of these ideals are washed away or omitted in favor of trying to mask racism, but land is at the forefront, and at the end of the film, Scarlett resolves that she will always have Tara, which practically takes its name from the Latin term terra, meaning land. Tara will provide, and her home will always be there. It's actually quite beautiful how that theme is used throughout the film and explored, and is one of the best aspects of the film. That's something, too, that's discussed throughout the film, that it's part of what makes Scarlett both a complex and really stressful character to watch. She's manipulative and will do anything in the pursuit and security of her land, and everyone around her is just part of that pursuit. She can't find love even when there's those around her that love her. But as I said, she just loves land so much more. The film is populated with so many other great and memorable characters, which include, of course, the secondary lead of the film, Rhett Butler, played by Clark Gable. The film was even delayed so that the production could secure Clark Gable, and I'm so glad that they did, because this is such an iconic performance. Gable is able to provide a very gentlemanly persona so naturally that he fits right into the role. But my favorite features of this role is the character himself, who is an idealist looking out for only one person, Rhett Butler. He sees the failures of the South and their eventual loss, and only joins the war effort in the end when he knows there's actually no hope in fighting. He has a clear admiration for Scarlett and believes them to be very similar, but she can't get her girlish dreams of being with the person she's loved since childhood, Ashley, out of her head, and it breaks Rhett into doing some pretty heinous things throughout the film. Gone with the Wind is filled with these fantastic and memorable characters, but that doesn't mean all of them are on the side of good. I've already mentioned how flawed of a protagonist Scarlett is, and Rhett Butler is no different. One scene in particular is very telling and pretty problematic, where he literally threatens to kill her and crush her skull to get her thoughts of Ashley out of her head. And it eventually ends with him taking her upstairs to rape her. Definitely not a very heroic character, if I do say so myself. And to follow that up, the scene that follows almost apologizes the action by Rhett, saying he was drunk and sorry, and Scarlett seeming as if she had no problems at all with it, and this is simply an illusion, and pretty terrible and awkward, and I can see this completely turning off people from Rhett Butler, who before then was this shining example. But still, this film is populated with deeply flawed people, and I think that needs to be addressed before attacking the actions of these characters. Gone with the Wind isn't interested in telling the story of upright citizens, but you can't help but feel awkward about some of these instances in the film. One thing that the film attempted to do that must be commended as well as critiqued is something we've already addressed, that being the racism. Selznick wanted to give a voice to black people and put black actors at the forefront of the story, which is how we have such fine and memorable performances such as Hattie McDaniel's Mammy, Oscar Polk's Pork, and Butterfly McQueen's Prissy. Hattie McDaniel in particular has been immortalized in this role. It's iconic, it won her an Oscar, but again, it typecasted her into a singular role for the rest of her life. Gone with the Wind was an attempt at being progressive for its time, but in trying to do so, it only reinforced stereotypes, and in an attempt to not be racist, ended up being racist. But credit must be given to Hattie McDaniel, who takes her role with such gravitas and energy that she easily becomes a standout of the film. It's just a shame that the film ends up painting such a false picture of slavery and black people's attitudes towards it, and in doing so, it only reinforces the lost cause myth. Gone with the Wind is without a doubt one of the most ambitious films I've ever seen, and is the definition of an epic, and that can't go unaddressed. This film is a gigantic 4-hour film that takes you through the human experience and still is impressive to watch even today. The production is like no other, with large sets that rival some of the massive productions of the silent era, such as D.W. Griffith's Intolerance, and productions that wouldn't be seen again until the 1950s. Gone with the Wind is a large film with scale and ambition, and it can all be attributed to Selznick and his band of artists he had working on this film. Right from the opening of the film, when Max Steiner's impressive and romantic score kicks in, over the titles and text, you instantly know you're watching something truly impressive and classical. The score for this film is impeccable and one of the film's best attributes that gets you swept up in the drama and the story. I would argue it's one of the best scores ever made for a feature film and will stick with you far after the film ends. The movie is also matched with some of the most gorgeous cinematography ever, and viewing this on a big screen was well worth it. The sepia tone color grading, the use of Technicolor is unreal and creates a picture that has so much depth and detail throughout. Gone with the Wind is an example of a film that can make your mouth drop open and even brings tears to your eyes from the gorgeous shots. My favorite moments and shots are anything taking place at sunset. The skies have this red and orange glow while the characters are in the foreground and silhouettes, and those images are simply burned into my brain, especially the scene that comes just before the intermission where Scarlett makes a declaration that she will never go hungry again. It's triumphant and the purest form of filmmaking that I feel has never been matched since. It's masterful. There's no doubt in my mind that Gone with the Wind is a masterpiece. It is one of the best showcases of filmmaking ever put to screen. It's sweeping, romantic, problematic, and is marred by the problems caused by a lack of help from outside organizations like the NAACP. This was a monumental task to try to achieve, and though Selznick tried his best, it was clear that though his heart seemed to be in the right place, he was a little in over his head. Gone with the Wind will forever be flawed in this regard, but I still think it's a film worth watching that shouldn't be disregarded, and the history around its making needs to be understood. It is problematic. It does reinforce the lost cause myth, even if that was never the intention of the filmmakers. But at the end of the day, it's still a great film, and there's a reason it's still considered one of the greatest films of all time. However, I do have one other problem with the film that I think hurts it. It's been something that's been addressed by many other critics, and that is the film's second half. The first half is set against the backdrop of the Civil War. The pacing is lightning fast, and the interpersonal relationships are at the height of the enthralling drama. Watching the first half just fly by was really great to experience, but the second half doesn't have the same momentum. The narrative, in fact, becomes more fractured as large periods of time pass by from scene to scene and ends up feeling off. Scarlett's fall into a much more conniving character doesn't have the same weight as her struggle to survive at the first half. So by the time the film reached its final hour, I was beginning to feel the movie's runtime. This harms the flow of the story and lessens your overall engagement in a film that was doing so well very early on. It's the film's biggest flaw as a film. Obviously, Gone with the Wind is a flawed movie, morally as well. We've already gone over the racial issues that plague the film, and that can harm your enjoyment even if you have an understanding of the making of this film. Knowing the racism was never originally meant to be intentional. But Gone with the Wind does reinforce the lost cause myth, and that can be dangerous. But those ideas were not intentional at the time where they would absolutely be in the film Gods and Generals in 2003 of all years, which is a film I plan on reviewing at some time as well. Gone with the Wind is an impeccable film. It's classic, it's flawed, and still manages to entrance the viewer in a way few films can. It's a film that has truly reached immortality. It's a great drama, and it has all the problems we know from it, but it's something we should continue watching and understanding and learn from. And with all that said, I'm going to give Gone with the Wind an 8 out of 10. Don't be surprised if I eventually upgrade this film to a 9 out of 10 in the future. Most of my complaints against the film come from the second half, and it not being able to support that runtime in the end. The rest of the film is thrilling and should be looked at as a benchmark of American filmmaking, but should never be forgotten for the problems that still plague the film to this day. Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this review. If you haven't seen Gone with the Wind, I say it is very much worth checking out at least once in your life. But with all that said, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and stay positive.